When you realize how easy buttonholes are on this machine, you'll never shy away from them. So first, we're going to reach behind the machine and pull out the buttonhole foot. That's the foot with the red wheel. You'll also notice you have a manual buttonhole foot in the front. That is your C foot. Now notice, just a note, that it sits in the 4th foot slot over because it has this little tip at its back, and there's a little nub right down in there, so it sits nice and then doesn't fall out as we open and close things. So we're pulling out both those feet. Now what we have with the one with the red wheel is that it is censored. So we're going to plug it in, and that we can actually have the machine do the exact length of buttonhole based on your button. One little thing before I put it on, you'll notice that there is a red line on the foot, and there's also a white crown that is on the red wheel. When we put this on, and once we put our fabric underneath, we must line up the white crown with the white line. So I usually do that absolutely last, because once you put your fabric in, it sometimes moves that wheel. So put the foot on first. The part that plugs in is about halfway back along the edge. You might have to peek underneath the first time to get it lined up, but once you know where to put it, you can kind of do it just by feel. Now make sure that you give it a good push. You might even feel a little click. If for any reason you don't get that all the way inserted, you'll have what I call runaway buttonholes, and the buttonhole will start to go and go and go, and it'll never stop. It'll just keep getting longer and longer. So you'll know to reconnect that as you start. So we're going to go to our buttonhole menu and choose B, and we're going to just start with the very first one. You also can use the buttonhole option on the Sewing Advisor, and depending on your fabric you pick, you will get different buttonhole choices. Notice that some will include the buttonhole foot with the red wheel, and some will not. So this actually indicates a corded buttonhole, which we're going to do. We'll do some cording to show you how that works. So I'm going to just go ahead and start with a regular piece of fabric and a buttonhole. And it shows that the place that starts is where the black little dot is. It actually happens to be in the lower left corner. So that does indicate that I need to start closer here because it's going to sew away from us. I always tell my students do their very first buttonhole in the middle of their fabric when they test, because then that way they know which way it's going to go and we don't run off the fabric. So next, take your button, and you're going to look down here along the measuring area. Put the button at the 0. Notice that little dotted circle. When we line that up, it will show us how many millimeters. This actually is 15 millimeters, and you can go on screen right here and dial in the length of buttonhole you need. The machine will add for the extra part at the top, the tack at the top and the part and the tack at the bottom. That way it is all perfect. So we'll type in 15, and the rest is really ready to go. Once you put your fabric in, notice the fabric kind of moves this wheel a little bit. So once you get it to where you know you're going to start, I'm going to do mine this way. Then move the red wheel so the white crown lines up with the white dot. So step on your foot control. I always tell my students to put their hands in their lap and let the machine do the buttonhole for you. So it's going to first stitch all the way, straight stitch all the way back, and then it'll come down and satin stitch over it. Do make sure that you have interfaced your fabric properly, whether that's with a tearaway or some iron-on interfacing. That will really give the buttonhole the proper setting. Once it does, it returns back. It'll do the tack at the top and then zigzag down over and tack at the bottom. Just keep your foot on the foot control until it comes to a complete stop. There's an automatic cut and lift programmed into each buttonhole. So when we're done, it's perfect every time. So all you need to know is where you need to start. So if I needed a line of buttonholes here, I would just go ahead and put a start mark all the way across. Notice that the foot, here we'll show you with this one, the foot has little red lines on it here. So if you know you need to start 5/8 of an inch in, you can measure from the line to the needle and line that up with the edge of your fabric so you always have the right distance for the starting stitch. So there's different buttonholes to choose depending if you're doing a knit Or like for example, if we pick a knit fabric and buttonhole, so depending on which one, these little zigzaggy edges are knit ones. If you have a button that has a shank on it, then we're going to do a keyhole buttonhole. So those are available. Here, we'll just do one of those. We'll just get that started here. Another thing I sometimes like to do, here I'm going to make the white crown match the white line, is use the start-stop button. Then I don't have to hold my foot on the foot control. It will go ahead and stitch for me automatically. And talk about easy buttonholes. Why not let the machine do the work for you? So it will stitch up and back. It'll do the keyhole. Look, the arrows are even showing me what part it's doing at any given time. And we'll just let it finish on its own because it will lock and cut when it's done. Perfect. That is, so when you button with a shanked button, there's a place for that extra thread to sit in a larger opening instead of in a smaller opening here. You also have stitches that are a straight stitch buttonhole, and that actually has you use the A foot, and that one's just a little wider difference here. Let's do a manual buttonhole. So let's see here. Let's do a manual one that is corded. Cording gives a stability to the buttonhole, so especially if it's on a flimsy fabric or a stretchy fabric. It also gives the satin stitch something to stitch over, so it makes it look a little bit raised, a very professional look here. So we're going to unplug the sensor buttonhole foot, take it off, replace it with the C buttonhole foot. Notice how the cord is positioned. It's actually positioned over the back little nub of the foot. So I'm going to get this all the way started. It is also going to start down here. It will stitch in, you might say, reverse first. So I'm going to go ahead and put my fabric where it needs to be, take my cord, divide it in half, take it over the back of that little toe, and let me show you one other thing that it's going to do. See the buttonhole foot? There's little grooves in here. So the cord, once the foot sits down on the fabric, the cord will stay in those grooves for me. So once I get this set up, it's very easy to do. Okay, so divide this in half, slide it over the back part of the buttonhole. I'm going to just kind of hold it in front of me until I start. We're going to go ahead and use that start-stop button one more time. And we'll just go ahead. The cord is actually pulled through the buttonhole as it goes. Oh, sorry. This is a manual one. I'm in charge of how long this is, so I'll stop talking now and push. When I'm going to stop it, we're going to touch the reverse button to set the lengths. This is actually a good example of often needing a longer buttonhole for some other use, either whether it's a bigger button or something that just needs to be opened and we want a nice secure area. Okay, so there's the tack. Now it's coming back down the second leg. You can see by the screen the arrow's pointing down. So since I'm in charge of this, I do need to stop it when it comes back even to the first stitch we took. So here we are. Then we'll touch the reverse button to do the next step. Actually, that should be the tack, the lock, and the cut. And it is. All right. So now we have a buttonhole that's been corded. This is the loop that has been formed. We're going to take a hold of one of these cords. If one is hard to pull, pull the other one. We're just going to pull that cord back down the buttonhole so it hides it at the top. And then we can take some tapestry needles and thread the cord on it and poke it down to the back side and tie it off. Often too, I just even cut that and then give it a little tug and that cord almost disappears in there. So whichever way you like. Notice how much thicker this looks, and it's it is more of a raised look. So there's lots of different ways to do buttonholes. Here, let's do one more, like one of these. Oh, there's some decorative ones too. One that has like a zigzag look to it. So it's almost got like a stretch to it. Once again, this is my choice in length. I would want to do a line to know how far back to stitch, but for today we'll just go ahead and pretend. Touch the reverse button when we want it to turn around, and then we'll go ahead and finish up. We'll wait till it returns back to where we started. Touch reverse and let it finish out and lock. And that is how easy they are. So try out all the buttonholes. They do have different uses. And how pretty is that one there? What I like to do is use spray check to put a little bit of a glue down the middle and then use a buttonhole cutter to open up the buttonholes. So next we're going to sew on buttons and do a few other things that you find in this menu, including eyelets.